Hey guys, this is Colin Moshman for PokerStrategy.com. Today we have part one of a two-part series on a Saturday Splash win played by Sinusis, a very strong MTT S&G and Turbo MTT Reg. Now during the rebuy period, you exchange $2 for 3,000 chips, but if you make it to the add-on, you then exchange that same $2 for 30,000 chips. This gives a huge incentive to make the add-on period. Now back in the old days, you could late reg very close to the end of the 90-minute rebuy period, buy in for the min every time, and often reach the add-on for just one or two buy-ins, and that was a great strategy. And Sinusis tries to do the same approach here, but buying in instead at the end of the 60-minute late reg period and having to last 30 more minutes to make the add-on. So if you do take this strategy, you shouldn't buy a double stack. You should just pay a single buy-in for 3,000 chips and then only single rebuy thereafter, which may require changing your default stars settings if you normally have it set to automatically rebuy whenever possible. In general though, since the change to 90 minutes of late reg, I prefer just buying in at the start like normal. And the reason is because you're going to go through multiple rebuys buying in 60 minutes late. And here for example, Sinusis goes through about $12, playing very tight until the add-on. The benefit though to buying in at the start, even though sometimes you go through even more rebuys, is that you'll often run up a stack early, taking advantage of the spewest recreational players, and then take a much larger stack into the post-rebuy period for fewer buy-ins. So at this point we're going to look only at hands that Hero plays until we've passed the rebuy period, since he does play extremely tight, just waiting until he can buy the 30,000 chips for $2, which is essentially the right approach if you are going to do it this way. And then after that we'll look at every hand. So the initial hands he plays are all going to be when the blind commits him, and these are essentially non-decisions. And the only one that he's going to VPIP is when the big blind does completely commit him and he's getting tremendous odds on a call. And after that, we get to the add-on and normal play. So no more rebuys. And now we can look at this as if it's a normal turbo MTT. So here we have a clear 3-bet shove with the ace-queen off. Our full shoving range is going to depend on this opponent. In general, the absolute tightest we would go would be something like pocket sixes, ace-jack, ace-10 suited, king-queen suited. Against a laggier opener, we would certainly go wider. We would 3-bet shove any pair, any suited Broadway hand, most suited aces, hands like 10-9 suited. But the initial range I gave would be about the tightest we would consider going against any kind of normal opponent. So we fold a few more hands until Jack-9 offsuit here in the big blind. And one of the things we always want to do in spots like this is look left, which is incredibly crucial in post-ante play, because the big theme we're going to have is that we're risking less than the pot size. There's 9,600 out there. If Hero opens, which he does here, it's usually going to be to 8,000, 8,500 at the max. And so if everyone folds half the time, that's a great outcome. And so roughly speaking, if all three of these players defend by 3-betting, for example, or however they want to defend, with about a range of top 20%, then that's going to be enough for us to show that immediate profit. Of course, these are not independent events. We also expect the blinds to 3-bet shove much wider, but roughly speaking, 20% defense range from these three guys, and we're gold. So we always want to look left, look at stats, and if we have tighter, more passive opponents, be much more inclined to make an open when it's close. So the next hand we play is going to be right here with the Jack-10 suited. Fine hand to open. We have blockers. Hand plays well post, as we definitely might get flatted, particularly in a more low-stakes tournament. So we face a 2x 3-bet, and here we need to really make a decision in terms of how much we read into the fact that he's 2xing. So normally if we have a suited Broadway hand, we face a 10 blind shove, which this effectively is, then we're committed to the hand. The odds we're getting are too good in order to make this kind of a fold, and we have to put it in. So here, however, if this player has, for example, a very tag stats, let's say he's playing 13-11 and he 2x 3-bets, that would be enough where I would just make a very exploitive fold. Without that read, I would essentially treat this like a shove and just put it in here. Now the other alternative to 4-bet shoving is to stop and go. So we flat here, and then we go ahead and we shove any flop. So those are the two approaches I would normally take. And here hero check folds, which I don't actually like. So at this point, we do flop about 5 clean outs, and occasionally the jacks and the 10s will also be outs. So if we were going to take this, I would go ahead and stop and go this flop. But again, we always want to think what we know about our opponents and whether we can make exploitive folds based on their stats and what we know about them. So a spot like this are about 10 blinds, blind on blind, post ante, and generally the Nash range here is going to be that the small blind shoves about top 70%. H6 off should be right around the bottom of our open shoving range. And it's pretty rare that we're going to shove any tighter than that. Against some players we can absolutely shove wider, expecting them to under defend and not call off a hand like King Deuce offsuit, which will be part of the big blind's Nash calling range. But H6 off is going to be a fine shove, and we take that one down. So a few more folds here. Ace Queen suited is going to be a clear 3-bet shove. In general, the tightest we would 3-bet shove here would be around 8s, Ace Queen, Ace Jack suited. And again, we are going to look at this player's stats. We can 3-bet shove much wider over that 22-19 player than a more tight aggressive, for example, or passive opponent. And we win that one with the Ace Queen suited. So E6 offsuit, let's take a look at this one in Equilab and do a more manual calculation, because a lot of the time we're going to learn more doing this more manually than having a program like Hold'em Research's calculator just immediately spit out the correct answer. And the approach we're going to take in a spot like this, we can immediately see the odds we're getting. Okay, the bet is going to be to 46. And so there's 60,000 out there. It costs us 40,000 to call. So once we see the pot is 60,000, stars displays at the top, 40,000 to call, we see we're getting 3-2 odds, and you can recognize 3-2 is 40%. So we want anything better than 40% equity against his shoving range. So now we have to put him on a range. Of course, this will also depend on his stats, but we'll just take a look at a pretty standard, solid shoving range here, which is going to be any pair, any suited ace, as well as all of the suited Broadway hands. We're also put in 10-9 suited. Some of these better suited hands, 9-8 suited. We'll give them down to about ace-8 offsuit, as well as most offsuit Broadway hands. So here you have a range of about top 23%. Unless he's very tight, he should be shoving at least this wide. And we can give ourselves our ace-6 offsuit and say, do we have the 40% equity? And we do. We have about 42%. So against this range, assuming we want maybe a very slight edge here, we're going to have a profitable call. Actually, the way we need to do this is going to determine 40% equity against this range in this hand. We actually delete our hand to use the Tools Hands Range calculator. We say we want 40% equity, and these are going to be the hands that have it. So down to about ace-4 offsuit. So unless he's a very tight player, I would go ahead and make the call. So we fold a few more hands before picking up the pocket queens, and here the effective stack is relatively short. It's going to be about 17 blinds with this player. There's a flatter in there as well. We're not particularly deep with anyone, so I would just go ahead and 3-bet shove here. If he started the hand off with anything over about 20 blinds, then I would 3-bet small, but at this effective stack I would just 3-bet shove. So a very nice shove by hero, and a fine outcome when we take that pot down uncontested. So standard open with the king queen, and fold facing the 2 all-ins with the jack-9 offsuit. King queen again here, and there's a limp from the hijack. So what we want to do here is we want to isolate very wide, because a lot of the time we're just going to take down this pot. Not quite uncontested. We still have this player to contend with for the small main pot. We take down a guaranteed side pot. So we should raise here to about 3x 21k with a wide range. I would do that here with any ace, any pair, any Broadway hand, and hands down to, for example, king 5 suited, 8-7 suited, and make all of those about 21,000. So a nice ISO there, and we face a 3-bet shove from the big blind. And given here that we're well over 20 blinds deep, a lot of guys are not going to be 3-bet shoving nearly as wide as the Nash range facing this action. I would go ahead and fold here, so I like hero's fold, and a good 3-bet shove by the big blind with this ace-10 offsuit. So pocket 6s is going to be a definite open here, and our plan is going to be to call off the small blind, fold to the remaining players, but there is also the chance that we'll get flatted here. And we get it in and bink the river. So as you guys can probably guess, there is a bit of a selection effect. And when you win a Turbo MTT rebuy that has 8,500 players, you are going to tend to run pretty good in the process. So Ace 8 offsuit here. Let's think for a second about our shoving range in this spot, and I'm going to go ahead and pull this one up in the Hold'em Resources Nash calculator. So to do that, it's a pretty simple process. I've just imported the full hand history, and then I right click to do this as a basic shove fold hand. We put in winner take all payout structure and tell the program to do the calculation. And when we do that, we'll look at the low jack player, Malagan. And here's his shoving range, which looks pretty reasonable. He's under 10 blinds. Some guys might shove, particularly recreational players, a little bit tighter than this, but this is a fine starting point. And so based on that, we call right down to Ace 8 offsuit. And when I pull this up, it is actually showing up a slightly negative. So this is basically break even. And against a lot of players, I think this is actually the right fold. I like calling here with the range of about 4s, Ace 7 or 8 suited, Ace 9 off, King Jack suited, King Queen off is a fine range to put it in with here. So good fold by here, right around the cusp of a profitable call. In pocket tens, nothing to do here besides 4-bet. Now, the one thing here is that we are greater than 25 blinds effective with the small blind. So shoving is definitely a fine option. The other option that we do have is, particularly if either the initial opener or one of the blinds is very passive, is to 4-bet to say 35,000 here, and then go ahead and make a decision if we do face a 4-bet. So for example, let's say that we have a hand like Ace 10 suited. We go ahead, we make it 36k. This player is very passive, and he now 5-bet shoves. We can go ahead and fold our Ace 10 suited. So at this effective stack, that is definitely an option available to us, and it's going to be most important when we have passive players left to act. So a couple more folds, and pocket 4s to relax to open. Now, one thing that's very important, particularly if you do have a looser style and you're used to normally opening all pocket pairs from all positions, is to pay very close attention, because some of the time the low pocket pairs are going to be the worst hands to open. So let's say, for example, we're under the gun and the effective stack is about 17 blinds, then it may not make any sense to open deuces if we don't expect we're going to be flatted much at all. And when we do, the implied odds are pretty poor. We're not going to be able to call anyone off facing a 3-bet shove. We don't have blockers. So a lot of the time the small pocket pairs are not good hands to open. Here, however, both blinds we can comfortably call off. The blinds are generally going to be the players that will defend the widest, that will 3-bet shove the widest, particularly here when they're short. So because of the fact we can call both of them off, this is a fine open. So we get to a flop with a stack to pot ratio of a bit under 2, and I would just go ahead and bet fold here. We can get away with a very small c-bet. This is an extremely dry flop, so I would just go ahead and fire here about a third of pot. Go ahead and bet like 17, 18,000, and if he stays in the hand, pretty much just give up the pot. So 18-7, absolutely perfect, and we take it down with a very good risk-reward ratio. So 9-6 offsuit, absolutely we should just go ahead and check this. I definitely would not shove a hand this week here. I think he's going to call too often. We can shove hands down to, for example, low offsuit aces, hands like 9-8 suited, King 7 suited, but 6-9 offsuit we should just check. And we nail the flop. Both betting out and checking are reasonable here. It should depend to some extent on his stats. If, for example, he had 70/0 stats, I would just go ahead and bet out. But we don't need to worry too much about building a pot. The stack to pot ratio is pretty low here, so I like Hero's decision to check and put in a check raise. So a nice line, he pots it and then folds the check raise. So a really nice outcome here that we take that pot down without a fight. Jack 9 suited would be an open on the button. So here goes ahead and opens and takes that down. And pocket queens, he flat. So one of the things that we need to do in spots like this is consider the effective stack. And here the effective stack is going to be our stack with a big blind. So that's going to be right about 30 blinds. And when we're about 30 blinds, we face a shove for over 5 blinds. I like not having any 3-bet range. So we simply flat our entire range from the worst hands we would flat. So for example here, if we have a hand like ace-9 offsuit, we just flat that. If we have aces, we flat that. And so that's going to not allow anybody to read anything into whether we're flatting versus 3-betting. And that is, I believe, our best response to this situation. And we take that pot down. So ace-9 offsuit here elects to open. And one thing that's interesting about spots like this is I want to pull this hand up in Nash, not to look at how to respond to a 3-bet shove or whether we should open shove, but to look at the initial Nash open raising range in a spot like this. And what we'll notice here is that a lot of the hands that are the most powerful are going to be the ace-x hands. And the reason for that is because we have good equity against the big blind. We expect to put it in extremely wide. And we also have blockers against the remaining players. So those hands are going to be often very good candidates to open, particularly when it's extremely likely we get action from one player like it is with the big blind here. And hands like 7-6 suited deuces, they're not part of this range. A hand like 7-6 suited, that definitely makes sense because we're not going to call it off against anyone except for the big blind. And for hands that we do want to put it in against the big blind, with a hand like ace deuce off has higher equity against this very wide 3-bet shoving range in the spot. So for those reasons, this is definitely a good open with the ace-9 offsuit, but we don't have anyone contest it. So a clear raise call here, and we might want to think a little bit about what our full raise calling range is going to be in this spot for 15 blinds. And I'm going to once again pull this up as a Nash hand. But the one thing that's very important here is that we are going to want to call it off against the majority of players tighter than the Nash calling range. So let's take a look at that and then we'll elaborate on why that is. So here's the output of the Hold'em Resources Nash calculator. And as you guys probably guessed, not the big blind, the player 1 to the left of us, UTG plus 1, the average player UTG plus 1 is not going to be shoving quite this wide. Certainly a hand like ace-queen off, we would expect him to shove, but pocket sixes, queen-jack suited, plenty of players are not going to be shoving this wide. And so we have a calling range based on this of eights, ace-queen off, ace-jack suited, king-queen suited, but generally I would call a little bit tighter in this spot. So if we now edit his range and we put him on a range that includes the same ace-x hands, but let's take away king-10 suited, queen-jack suited, sixes, and we'll even leave in 7. So this would be the widest I would assume that most players are going to shove in this spot, unless they have very lag stats. So this gives us a full calling range of 8s, ace-queen off, ace-jack suited, so pretty similar there, and of course a standard call with our ace-king offsuit. And notice that he does show up with a hand that's outside of his Nash 3-bet shove range with the ace-jack offsuit. So ace-10 offsuit, we're going to happily call it off here. And this is going to be very close to ATC. I think our Nash calling range here, just under 2 to 1, is going to be about top 75%. So a hand like 5-4 suited is going to be a snap call, jack deuce off. Very wide calling range in spots like this. And now here opens the 3 deuce suited. So this is not going to be a Nash open for sure. In fact, the suitedness is going to be nothing in Nash. And the reason for that is because the Nash ranges don't account for flatting. And of course, we're not calling it off against either player. So this is basically, from a Nash perspective, one of the absolute worst hands you can possibly open. But with that said, similar to before, we have to consider whether we show an immediate profit. And if we have guys here, so any kind of stats like 13/5, 11/10, anything that's tighter and more passive, this is going to be a great opportunity to open very wide on the button and possibly ATC if those stats are extreme enough. So always look out for that. And with the pocket 10s here, I would once again, I was going to say once again flat, but here the effective stack with this player is 350. So if we do flat here, then we have 140 out there, and we're committed against our entire range against this player, unless we're at the very bottom of our calling range and he's incredibly tight. So because it's such a large part of the effective remaining stack with these players, Just 3-bet shoving our entire range is totally fine here. If he was shoving anything 100k or less, then I would like only having a flatting range. So King 9 and Queen 9 offsuit, we both fold. And Ace 9 offsuit is going to be a snap call, and we need to call very wide here. We're getting close to 2-1. Calling range here is going to certainly include hands like King Deuce offsuit would be a clear call in this spot. 5-4 suited, 8-7 off, probably about 2/3 of hands is going to be our range in this spot. And we take that one. 9-7 offsuit, we would have of course open shoved in the small blind had everyone folded to us. And Ace-10 suited is definitely going to be a hand we put it in with here. And same thing, no point in really having a flatting range, as this is going to be for over half of the remaining stack with these players. So we can just go ahead and 3-bet shove the entire range of hands we play. And so here it does that. 8-3 offsuit, we fold in the big blind. And no need to force any play, we're over 20 blinds. Which is pretty nice in one of these turbos where the effective stack often plays out around 15 or 17 blinds. And one thing that's very interesting about this hand is that here he elects to open min-raise despite the fact that we're 8 blinds or so post-ante. And his plan is almost certainly going to be to raise fold. He's not going to call it off here with the Jack 5 offsuit. If he did think he had to call it off, he would go ahead and open shove instead. And while I don't know, of course, what stats Hugh had up on these players and what his HUD was displaying, against the right players, this can be excellent exploitive play. And the reason for that is just because of an immediate profit framework. We're not playing our cards in this situation. The fact that we have the Jack 5 offsuit is basically irrelevant. It's simply that we think these players are going to underdefend based on tight and passive stats. And that's absolutely a great approach to take, particularly in lower stakes, softer turbos, any turbos in fact, is to always look left and see if we do have a profitable opportunity to come in wide and steal, even if that means raise folding a relatively short stack. So we get bad beta there with aces to sevens, but the very next hand we win it all back and then some with aces to tens. And again, we are going to tend to run pretty decently when we win one of these, so not too much of a surprise there. King 4 suited, here he elects to come in with the open. Now the one thing here is that we are of course going to have to call off both the button as well as the small blind, so a bit of a more marginal open, and we end up raise folding versus an 11 blind cutoff shove. So sixes, here he elects to open, and again we talked about the lower pocket pairs. Here this is not quite as low a pocket pair, but this is a good open, and the reason here is because we can go ahead and call it off from everyone at this table besides the player who's MP1 as well as the cutoff. Against those guys are fold, but we definitely have the equity to call it off against everyone else. So for that reason, this is a very good spot to open the pocket sixes. And we face a flat from the big blind. One of the first things we want to think about in these spots before we consider what action we're going to take is, are we willing to stack off? Here the answer is yes. And the reason for that is because if he had 8s plus, it's very likely, and this is super passive, that he would have 3-bet shove pre. There shouldn't be too many 4x hands in his range for flatting pre. Plus, from a hand combination perspective, there are of course many fewer of those hands given that there are 2 4s on the flop. So besides an occasional 7x, maybe as a hand like 8-7 suited, ace 7, then we're looking pretty good here, and we should stack off at the stack to pot ratio. And he goes ahead and donk bet shoves, and that makes it extremely unlikely that he has a 4, so very unlikely a 4 isn't going to check and look for hero to c-bet. This looks like a 7x hand, a draw, or some kind of total air hand. So maybe he has, for example, a 6-5 of spades, maybe he has a couple of high hearts, which isn't ideal as we're roughly flipping against that hand, but with the overlay that's a pretty good spot. So basically the only time that we're screwed here is when he does have a 7x hand, but this is going to be a profitable call given the overlay, and we win that flip and take the pot down. So a very nicely played hand by hero. Now we're getting about 4-1 and we have an ATC call. And hero makes that and actually takes the best hand into the flop. 4-3 offsuit, we would generally open fold in the small blind, but against the right player in the big blind, we go ahead and open raise ATC to 85,000. And we face a min raise now from the cutoff. So what do we have to basically decide? This is like a 3 blind shove. Is what kind of equity do we have against this range? And here we probably have about 50% equity. You should be on a very wide open shoving range. And given that his stack is 112 and there's 96 in the center to start this off, this is a fine spot to isolate him and get involved here. And notice that we should make it the smallest amount possible, because anything we do is going to commit us against the big blind, and against the small blind we're definitely not going to call it off if he 4-bet shoves. So I would just go ahead and click it here to 120, which is exactly what hero does, and that's the perfect line in this spot. Queen 10 off would have been an open min raise in the cutoff. And ace 7 offsuit here opens, and again, these ace-x hands that we don't always want to open spots like this, but these are usually going to be part of the Nash open raising range. They are fine candidates to open because we are going to have the blocker. And here's plan here, I assume, is going to be to fold to any of these players, and this one is hyper loose, and make a stats-based decision based on the big blind. Usually we would not fold here facing an 8 blind shove, but if he is very tight and passive, then we can go ahead and raise fold against him. So pocket 7 is definitely an open UTG when we take that down. And now with the ace queen, obviously we're not going to fold, but we have a decision here, which is, do we want to defend this hand by flatting or by 3-betting? Now against most players, if we just go ahead and 3-bet shove, a bit of an overbet, but not unreasonable to 3-bet shove 22 blinds, it should be a profitable shove. But against most players, I actually like hero's decision to flat here. And the reason why I like that is because it keeps his range wider, so if we 3-bet shove, he's definitely going to fold the worst ace-x hands in his range, or at least it's quite likely he will, and we're happy for those to stick in. And a lot of the time, if we do get a call here, it's going to be against ace-king and pocket pairs, which is not a great outcome for us. So I do like the decision to flat here, keep hero's range, a villain's range a bit wider. So it goes check, check, and based on that we can make some assumptions about what his range looks like at this point. And if he had a pair, he probably would have seen, but occasionally he'll check back pocket 7s as a slow play, or pocket 10s for pocket control, but a high pair is usually going to bet. I would expect a hand like 10s to bet the majority of the time. So usually when he checks back here, this is going to be a hand like king queen suited, ace king, ace queen, ace 10 suited, something like that. So it's kind of the range we expect him to have at this stage of the hand. And turn comes a 9, and if we go ahead and fire, unless he has, say, so we have the ace of spades, and so that's going to eliminate the flush draws that he would have in his range for the most part, besides a hand like king queen of spades. So a lot of those ace high hands, the king x hands in his range, mainly king queen suited, king queen of hearts, there's a good chance is just going to fold. So I like this bet. I would size it a little bit larger, which I think is going to have slightly higher probability of getting those hands to fold. But definitely good things can come of that bet, folding out a chop, folding out the ace king. And now we check and give up on the river, and he is ace king. So a couple more folds here. Sim here would have opened the ace 5 off in the cutoff, and now he opens the ace 6 in the hijack, again mainly taking advantage of the blocker potential of those hands. And not going to play another hand here until 5-3 off, fold in the big blind. And deuces here, just going to be a fold on the button. I wouldn't 3-bet shove here against that player who's effectively min-raising, or actually 2.5xing a relatively short stack. And next open, so we fold the pocket fours here, which is a good fold for exactly the reasons I was mentioning before. So this is going to be a little bit too deep to open shove. We have about 16 blinds that wouldn't open shove here. And the only player that we're going to be happy to call off is going to be the players from the button onward. So for those reasons, I do like this fold with the pocket fours. So pocket 7s, next one we definitely expect hero to play. And we are going to have a clear 3-bet shove here, with any pocket pair. So a full shoving range in this spot would be, I put it with any ace here, of course, any pair, any Broadway hand, and associated hands like 10-9 suited, we can definitely put it in. King X hands from like King 8 off and King 6 or 7 suited plus. So that's going to be about our range here. And here 3-bet shoves and wins against the King 4 suited. And we still have a stack even after making this raise fold of about 16 blinds, so no need to force any kind of a play. That's a fine stack to have, particularly in a turbo. And ace-10 suited, we normally want a 3-bet shove in this spot. And this is going to depend somewhat on these players, particularly the initial raiser. So generally, unless this player has tag stats and we're suspicious of a trap, this is usually going to be a weaker hand that flats instead of 3-betting, and we're mainly interested in this player's stats. So if he has any kind of stats that are, say, 16-14 or 30-17, anything that isn't particularly tight, we can profitably 3-bet shove here, and a great outcome when hero takes that uncontested. So 7-6 suited I generally wouldn't open here because we don't have blockers and we can't call off any of these players. So in this we expect that some of them are very likely to flat, in which case we can take some advantage of the post-flop potential, or we think will show an immediate profit. Usually I would not pick that particular hand as a candidate to open. So pocket 3s here is definitely going to be a call facing about a 6 blind shove. Actually he's shoving, looking at this, well, I thought actually for a second he was shoving 10 million, which really wouldn't make too much sense given the stacks in play here, but he is actually shoving 1 million. So based on that, that is going to be about a 6 blind shove. And I would definitely call this off here. Here it goes ahead and makes a bit of a tight fold, but we can go ahead. Let's pull this one back up in Equilab. And what we can see here is that, well, Universal is displaying to the side that we're getting 1.7 to 1. In game, you can just take the total pot, which is going to be about 1.45 million, divided by the call amount, and we get odds which we can convert into a percent equity that we need. If anyone wants me to elaborate on that, I'm happy to do that, but the answer we get is that we want about 37% equity against this shoving range, and with any pair, any suited ace, any suited Broadway hand, we expect to get that pretty easily. So here, for example, if we go ahead, we put them on a range of any pocket pair, which you should certainly be shoving. Any Broadway hand should be a pretty clear shove for him. And we'll give him here a range of about top 25% of hands. And we don't expect that many players are going to be shoving tighter than that in this spot. And we'll have comfortably more than the equity we need with the pocket 3s. So here we have about 45% equity. So this is the first, I think, fairly significant mistake Hero makes. And one of the things that's really important in turbos and hypers in particular is that as it gets deeper and deeper, the money starts becoming more significant, and you don't want to take what feels like marginal spots, and you don't want to put a large percent of your stack at risk needlessly, but a spot like this is too profitable to pass. So definitely be careful about making sure to hit all of those spots. And also, don't just think about it in terms of, well, it would really suck if I lost here. Think about, well, it'd be great if I won. If I won, I'm going to be one of the chip leaders. I'm going to have a very big stack. And nice call here with the pocket 10s, of course. So always think about the potential upside as well, as that is going to be very significant in these spots. So ace-8 suited is going to be a fine fold here against a tighter player. Against a laggier opener, we can 3-bet shove this. And 9-5 suited, also going to be a fold. And look at pocket 10s here as the last hand from this video, and continue the action in the next video. And so we face a flat and effectively a 3-bet shove here from this player in the hijack. So normally this would be a pretty mandatory call, and here are folds here. And what Hero says about this hand is that he puts the 3-better on a very tight range of premium hands because of the size of the 3-bet and the stats that he had on him. So generally I think this would be a pretty crazy hand to raise fold, but against the right players, if we do put him on a tight enough range of, for example, jacks plus ace king, and maybe we're also a little bit suspicious of the flat from this player, it can certainly be correct. But without very specific reads, this would be a pretty mandatory raise call or raise 4-bet shove. And fortunately, these players are going to get to showdown, so we can see whether or not Hero was correct about that. And kind of an odd flat here. We'd expect Oleg to 4-bet shove. And when he doesn't, the two main options are that either he's a recreational player who's not thinking ahead, or he's planning to stop and go and just jam any flop. But in fact, he does go ahead and fold. So we don't get to see the showdown there. So that's going to end part 1 of this video. If you guys have any questions or comments at all, please feel free to leave them in the thread, and I'm more than happy to answer. This has been Colin Moshman for PokerStrategy.com.